Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the Heisman players that I'm watching very closely in the SEC. We didn't even get to all the guys that could be on that list. Jackson Dart absolutely would have been on that list if I didn't have the three position rule. Nico Iamaleava, Brady Cook, Jackson Arnold, a lot of guys could make some noise in the SEC. We'll unpack the Big 12, or the Big 10, excuse me. We'll do that tomorrow. But let's get to Monday questions. There is so much going on around Tuscaloosa, Alabama right about now. And there's some questions around it, and there's a tinge of worry, but I think a little bit less now than there were when Nick Saban actually hung him up and they had to hire a new coach. But let's get into some of these questions, and I think one of the biggest ones going into this season is going to be, without question, how does Jalen Milroe and Kalen DeBoer fit together? As we all know, Jalen Milroe and Michael Penix are not the same quarterback. They are two very, very different quarterbacks. Jalen Milroe is going to lean on his run game a little bit more aggressively. He's not going to make those really remarkable, 10 to 20 yard passes that Michael Penix really made a living off of last year and was just so incredible at. He's not necessarily the most comfortable in the pocket, likes to, extend the pocket a little bit and make some of those plays. But at the end of the day, they need him to be better than he was a year ago to win a national title or even to win the SEC. And I fully understand they won the SEC last year and that was no problem. But the reality is it's getting tougher. I think Georgia's better than they were a year ago. Texas coming in obviously complicates things a little bit. Ole Miss is much better than they were a year ago. So you're going to have more hurdles, and that guy just needs to be more special. That's just the reality of this situation, and I think the fit between those two is going to be absolutely huge. Now, Kalen DeBoer is one of those quarterback whisperers in college football. The Lincoln Riley, Steve Sarkisian, Kalen DeBoer, Mike Norvell to a certain degree over there at Florida State. So there are some guys that can just make stuff happen. And Michael Penix, when he came into Washington, there were not people sitting there saying this is going to be a top 10 NFL draft pick and this guy's going to light the world on fire and play for a national title while he's at Washington. That guy's the reason that it happened. Kalen DeBoer was just incredible with Michael Penix from the second he showed up in Seattle to the second that he left. And I think it's one of those things that you look at Jalen Milroe and no, the tools are not the same. The tools are not quite as great when it comes to accuracy and things of that nature. It doesn't mean that Jalen Milroe can't throw the ball. His arm strength is just absolutely ridiculous. Frankly, it might be one of the top in the country. I think Malik Murphy might have the top, but that's something that I'd love to see at some point, a long throw competition between these guys. But at the end of the day, he does have to start making those NFL throws that we talked about earlier. Fitting it over some coverages, some zone coverages where you're fitting it over the linebacker that's playing hook coverage, but you're fitting it under the middle safety that's playing deep in cover 3. Whatever it looks like, you're going to have to make certain plays that he didn't make a year ago. Let's just be totally honest, but he made plenty of plays to win them football games. It'll be fascinating to kind of watch this offense unfold because it could be a lot like the Washington offense a year ago. It could be a lot more of a run game where you're leaning on guys like Justice Haynes and Jamarian Miller and Jalen Milroe in a read option type game. Or you could say, we have to throw the ball to win a national title, and we're going to get there by, whether it's pulling teeth or whatever, we're going to get you there. And he's going to have to make those plays. So it'll be fascinating to watch, what this offense looks like. Frankly, I think it's going to be much more run-heavy than it was at Washington a year ago, even though it was already relatively run-heavy at Washington because that's how good offenses always work. But I do think Jalen Milroe has every ability to have a SEC championship caliber season, have a playoff caliber season, even have a national title caliber season. But certain things need to happen, and the biggest thing is these two guys need to be in lockstep. They need to make sure that they are essentially just sharing a brain, and obviously being in his ear during those plays is going to help a ton. But it'll be fascinating to watch this offense unfold, and if this marriage between these two really works, or if it's just a blip on the early part of Kalen DeBoer's quarterback journey in Tuscaloosa. It'll be fascinating to watch for sure. But the next question I have is, who are the playmakers on the back end of this defense? And are they good enough? Which is a totally different question. But the Bama back end's kind of a funny one because to me, there's two guys that I totally I fully know who they are, and I am fully confident in what they are, and that's really all American level players. Malachi Moore and Keon Saab are just fantastic. They're going to be really, really good safeties for them. I have very, very few questions about that. The rest of the guys are where things get just a little bit more confusing. Devontae Smith is at the nickelback position for them. He's got to take a step forward. And he's not necessarily a bad player. He had a really, really solid season a year ago. But he is stepping into a position that Malachi Moore tended to kind of occupy the last couple of years. So you're filling big shoes is essentially the best way to put it. And I think this kid has every ability to be a big-time player, but he's definitely going to have to be huge for them. And he's definitely going to be holding down a spot that is really, really important when it comes down to holding down that defense that employs 5 DBs. That nickelback is kind of the engine of that entire back end. So it'll be fascinating to watch that guy kind of unfold and see if he can elevate his game just a little bit. Not far by any means, but it'll be fascinating to watch that. And then you get into the freshmen, and it starts with Xavier Brown. This is a guy that likely will be at one of the starting corner positions across from the USC transfer Damani Jackson, who's another guy that I'm a little curious about. He was a 5-star coming out of high school, but never really played consistently at USC. Maybe a change of scenery is just what he needs. Maybe he's just not all that great of a corner and is going to struggle in the SEC. It'll be really, really interesting to watch that. But on top of Xavier Brown, you have Jalen Mbakwe, you have Xavier Mincy, Red Morgan had a great spring, Drake Kirkpatrick Jr., which made me feel really old when he committed. But all those guys are going to play real-time snaps this year. So it's going to be a young group. It's going to be a group that you're just going to have to hope that the stars align just a little bit and a couple of things fall your way, but there's plenty of ability back there for them to be a really solid unit overall. And then finally, the question that, frankly, I'm most curious about, and I think a lot of people across the country are most curious about, is what happens if Bama loses a couple of games? Frankly, this is a spoiled fan base, and I think they would say that too, to be totally honest. Having Nick Saban in town is a luxury that none of us have ever had to have, and man, has it been a beautiful time in Tuscaloosa, that's for sure. And these fans have become a little bit accustomed to having that level of success and having very, very few losses on their schedule. They've lost 2 games twice since 2011, which was really kind of 2009 was really the jumping off point, but they went 10-3 in 2010, and then it really took off like a rocket ship. It was just insane what they were doing from then on. But they've only lost 2 games in a regular season twice since then. It was 2022 and it was 2019. Both those years, it was Tennessee, just remarkable offense, as well as LSU in 2022. And then 2019, the best offense that I've ever seen, walked into Tuscaloosa and was able to get a win. That's the one of the only very, very few times that happened under Nick Saban at Bama. So it took a Herculean effort and some offenses that are really all-time offenses to take down this team multiple times in a season. And the question is, what happens if in year 1 they go 9-3, which is very much on the table if you look at that schedule. It is not going to be easy. They have Georgia coming to town, which as of right now, I'd pick Georgia. Obviously, a lot can change until then, but there's games on the schedule that don't look as easy as they used to look. The Ole Miss game is not nearly as easy as it looked, 3 to 5 years ago. LSU game, it's always tough. That's always going to be one that you're going to have to battle for, but you felt more confident than you're going to feel going in this year. I can almost promise you that. All that being said, what happens if, they go 9-3? What happens if they go maybe 8-4 and they lose a couple of games early on in the season to Georgia and maybe to Ole Miss? What happens to this fan base? Do they immediately start attacking Kalen DeBoer, saying he's not the right guy for the job and kind of starting to tear him down? Or have they recalibrated their expectations, said, this is, the reality of the sport now. A 12-team playoff is going to create more losses for these teams in the regular season. No divisions in a conference, even more so, is going to create more losses for these teams in the new era of the SEC and the Big Ten and the ACC. So this is kind of just the reality. Most teams across the country, on average, are going to lose more games going forward in a regular season than they have before. All that being said, Bama fans are not used to that. They absolutely are expecting something 11-1, 12-0, and I don't necessarily know if this is the vast majority of the fan base. Maybe the fan base is a little bit more tame than I'm giving him credit for, but frankly, I'd be a little bit surprised if I was. I think they are expecting a big-time year. I'll be totally honest, and I think if it goes poorly, we'll figure out what Kalen DeBoer is made of, because there will be people that, try to tear him down. There will be people that say this was the wrong guy for the job. How can you replace Nick Saban with someone that never coached in the SEC? And all this stuff will be said. I almost promise you that. How does he handle it will be the defining thing for the next 5 to 10 years of Bama football, because it's going to be different. They're going to take a step back. I can almost promise you that, where they're going to lose more games in the regular season than they have in the past because they don't have Nick Saban on the sideline. They're going to lose more games because there are no divisions and they're playing tougher opponents. So this is just the reality of the sport now. Can they adjust their expectations, or is Kalen DeBoer going to get absolutely battered and his entire era at Bama be kind of ruined because there wasn't a real calibration of expectations by the fan base, and in turn he gets absolutely torn to pieces because of it. So obviously not something you want to happen for Kalen DeBoer, and frankly I think he's going to be plenty good this year for Bama fans to be more than fine with where they're at. I think they'll go 10-2, maybe 11-1, maybe 9-3, but I think overall, I think Bama fans, to a certain extent, understand what this is going to be like. I think once it happens, it'll be a little bit different of conversation maybe, but at the end of the day, I do think they understand what's coming. I do think they understand there's going to be at least a little bit of a step back and some things they have to figure out. But at the end of the day, this guy is more than capable of making a winning product, and he can make it in year one. There's no doubt in my mind. But if he doesn't, it'll be really interesting to see what happens in Tuscaloosa. I'll just put it that way. But that'll do it for this segment. I do want to remind you all, this kind of an interactive segment, so drop any questions you want in the comments here, and I can absolutely add them into next show. If you want to do around one team in particular and ask 3 questions, I can absolutely unpack that. If you want to do questions about players, coaches, the world of college football as we know it, I'm happy to answer whatever you guys got. So, but that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We just have incredible people doing really, really good work across every single sport you could possibly want. So whatever you need in the world of sports, GSMC has you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.